Welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bhoe. We just had a most heartwarming discussion with Rhonda Mango about the Venezuelan situation here, and we're going to move on to the same topic with Dr. Roger Hussein in a different format. He made a presentation some time ago at the Trade and Economic Development Unit of the University of the West Indies. And we are going to play that presentation. It's a videotape, and we're going to play that presentation, and then we'll interrogate some of the issues. But before we go, I was interested in one of the items that Chanel presented in the news, which is the Minister of Labor talking about the fact that we may have a policy coming out from the cabinet, maybe today. So we'll see how that emerges, having to do with the vaccine, etc., in vaccination process in Trinidad and Tobago, and the protection and safety of people in the workplace. I want to commend the private sector in this country, all the chambers of this country, the big chambers and the small chambers, for the positions that they have taken to engage the trade union movement collectively in Trinidad and Tobago to find a peaceful and harmonious formula for going forward in terms of workplace protocols. I also want to commend the trade unions who have willingly begun an engagement with the private sector, with the chambers, to try and solve a problem. I mean, that is how a civilized society, a progressive society behaves, which is that people come together, they identify a problem. You know you have a problem. You identify that problem. You try to find a way of solving it. You talk it through, you work it out, and you get it done. I also want to commend the private sector for the role that they have taken in collaborating with the government to get people vaccinated so that we can keep the workplace safe and so that we can keep the society safe. You know, the vaccinations are important, and people need to get vaccinated. If you look at the United States now, you are seeing what is happening. I don't want to go into Asia, where the thing is really a pandemic, and many of the other countries are overrun now with this virus, and the mutations are horrible, and we do not seem able to control it. So I think we've got to take control of our own little island here, these two islands on which people live, Tobago and Trinidad, and we've got to make sure that everybody is safe. Because if people are not safe, you are not going to have a working economy. And once you cannot get your commercial enterprises going, you are not going to have any economic recovery in this society. And what that means in reality is that loss of income, loss of jobs, the inability to purchase in the marketplace, the poverty and vulnerability situation is going to, all of these things are going to increase, and the poverty situation in the country is going to worsen. We need to get the economy back on its feet. And you can't get the economy back on its feet if you have a set of unvaccinated people going all over the place. And when the vaccine is available, there was a time in this country when we didn't have the vaccines. And now that we have the vaccines, we must take advantage of the opportunity. And I'm glad that the labor movement and the private sector are working it out. I'm glad that government and private sector are increasing the vaccination drive. And I'm glad that the NGOs are also involved in the vaccination drive to try and push this through. So we look forward to the policy. They said that they put the policy out for comment, so we'll see how this will go. I want to go now to this videotape I have of Dr. Roger Hussein, an economist, and he has been working on this Venezuelan challenge for some time from an economic point of view. And let us hear what he has to say and see how we can engage some of those issues. Dr. Hussein, we'll have him on tape.
Structure of the presentation is as follows, and I'll move right into it. Now, one of the fascinating things about the Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago is that they represent an important demographic dividend. So if you were to look at the Trinidad and Tobago population, you would see the proportion of the Trinidad and Tobago population less than 20 years is 8%, whereas only 1.75% of the Venezuelan population is less than 20 years. At the other end, in terms of the proportion of the Venezuelan population over 45 years, it's only 13.5%, whilst a significant amount of the Trinidad and Tobago population is over 45 years. What you find is there is a great majority of the Venezuelans between 20 years and 45 years, and that represents a potential demographic dividend if properly managed for the Trinidad and Tobago economy. And policymakers have to lock on to this, because ours is a peculiar economy with an aging population, a very bad fiscal situation, and an economy that is stagnant. So, you have to pull back from all of this and ask yourself, let us assume the amount of Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago is 60,000 people. You have to pull back from all of this and ask yourself, how can 60,000 Venezuelans on our shore be embraced and engaged in a symbiotic way that helps to reduce the fiscal burden in the country, regenerate or create economic growth, because we have not had that for a while, and at the same point in time, help to deal with the aging population of Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the things we have done over the last 6 to 8 months is educate the public on some of the steps that could be taken in that regard. Now, this diagram here, it was presented before, represents to me the most important macroeconomic diagram confronting the Trinidad and Tobago economy. It's a general equilibrium diagram. It shows that the initial point of operation of the Trinidad and Tobago economy is at a point such as A, producing NT0 non-tradable goods and T0 tradable goods. And when the COVID-19 situation came to the Trinidad and Tobago economy, we were forced last year in March to shut down parts of the economy, and we drifted from A to a point such as B. One of the things that really captures my attention is the way we are opening up the economy. So we are opening up the economy, and we have to be careful, because we are opening up to what? And opening up back to what point? If we go back to point A to me was a very worrisome position. Christian, so I will just do a check at this point and make sure you are hearing me.
Yes, Dr. Hussein, loud and clear.
Right. Thank you. And point A to me is a very worrying position, in that it represents a labor force participation rate that is contracting, a debt level that is rising, an economic growth process that is contracting, a non-energy export position that is contracting, a corruption perception index that is not where it should be, and an ease of doing business index that is sliding. I don't think that A was a desirable point. I looked at the COVID situation, and I look at it still as a great chance to reset and recalibrate the Trinidad and Tobago economy from the extremely poor economic structure that 20 years of natural gas production since Atlantic Energy Train 1 forced onto the economy by virtue of the Dutch disease. And therefore, I would have thought that all efforts and all policy making ideas would have been drifting the economy away from options such as A and C towards an option such as D, which is an extremely greater focus on the production of tradable goods. And more than tradable goods, I will say the production of non-energy export-oriented goods. That's where I think policymakers should be heavily driving the Trinidad and Tobago economy. That's where I think a lot of thought should be put into the economy. And when I see, in my mind, we are drifting closer to C than to a point such as D, it worries me and it has me concerned. And I am of the opinion that the Venezuelan immigrants, and I saw Mr. Gary Griffith refer to 120,000 illegal Venezuelan immigrants in May. I am going to assume 60,000 throughout this conversation, so my numbers would always be conservative. I think 60,000 Venezuelan immigrants here should be able to put us from A back onto a point such as D, which is win-win for the Trinidad and Tobago economy, and of course, moves us onto a higher indifference curve or a higher level of welfare. And so, in thinking through where we have to go, I think, as I said, this general equilibrium diagram should be the overarching framework guiding macroeconomic thought. I read the economic recovery document, and I think, and this is my reading of it, seems to be taking us towards the point C. And I am not sure that is correct. In fact, I think that is wrong, because point C is associated with a worsening of the current account balance, and that's something we should be encouraging at this point in time, especially given that our stock of reserves, it has contracted significantly in the last few years. In terms of the fiscal impact of immigrants, we are just making an overview estimation here. It would take much more detailed information to provide a significantly more accurate number. This is just almost a back of the envelope type of calculation to give policymakers some type of guiding framework of a basic methodology. There are three main phases in the migrant life cycle. The time the migrant arrives in Trinidad and Tobago, which in turn, of course, would condition the point in which they could start to work. Of course, their age at which they arrive. If they come here and some of them are housewives or they are sick, whether or not they are part of the labor market and they are participating. Our labor force participation rate in the Trinidad and Tobago economy is abysmal. It's about 54% as we speak. And it has contracted from 63% around 2006. And I compare it with 72% in the Bahamas, we have a long way to go. And if policymakers in Trinidad and Tobago could find a way, using the Venezuelan labor force in part and otherwise, to bring our labor force participation rate up to 72%, equivalent to that of the Bahamas, so 65%, equivalent to that of the Caribbean average, that alone represents a massive increase in GDP and something which we certainly would be able to work out if required. And then we also have the retirement age of the immigrant, which would tell us about certain type of privileges and benefits he or she may have to get. If the migrant enters the country and starts to work immediately, then even if they only buy doubles and various things like that, we get implicitly, we get some value-added tax at some point. So when the migrant starts to work, is important. Now, they also use up resources in the economy in terms of, they use up national security, they use up health care, and they use up a basic amount of registration time. So we have to take those costs seriously into consideration when we pool one number in terms of the expenditure side, and when we look at the revenue side, we have to look at some other factors. There are two sets of factors which play an influential role in determining the net fiscal impact of immigration. This is a part, of course, from what stage the immigrant is at in the life cycle of contribution. And these are the migrant characteristics themselves. and the host country characteristics. If the migrants are ineligible to work, then that would obviously adversely affect their fiscal contribution, be it whether their fiscal contribution is from a direct means or indirect means like value-added tax. Now, this is where the registration of the migrants comes into play. If we have 16,500 migrants registered, out of the number I'm using is 60,000, then only about a quarter of the migrants are registered. And that, to me, folks, makes no sense. I think we should register all the migrants in Trinidad and Tobago and increase the probability that they would be unafraid to work and increase the probability that they would be able to work in the formal sector as compared to the informal sector, and increase the probability that they would work in the export-oriented or import-substituting sector as compared to the non-tradable sector. And these are the probabilities that really matter moving forward, because if we get it wrong in terms of the number of people registered as a proportion of the total number of migrants here, then that would have fiscal implications and perhaps more importantly, implications for the current account balance. And that's the aspect that also really bothers me. The current account balance in Trinidad and Tobago needs a boost. And if we, for endogenous reasons, do not register all the Venezuelans, then we will be making steps in the wrong direction. Also, the tax system is heavily focused on the formal sector of the economy, and the migrants are mainly working in the informal sector. That in turn would affect the amount of revenues we collect. Now, there are two techniques in the literature for calculating the fiscal impact of immigrants. One is the static and one is the dynamic. The static approach, the majority of the literature focuses on the static approach. It takes a particular year and it compares the sum of the taxes paid by the immigrants to the benefits received by them. The dynamic approach in turn it focuses on the immigrant life cycle. So it takes a longer way view. It treats with children in a particular way, and these models rely heavily on the type of assumptions made about the future. We are broadly speaking here using a rough version of the static method. In the static method, the way public goods are treated and migrant children are treated obviously would affect the net fiscal outcomes. So you have two types of public goods. They are pure public goods and congestible public goods. Pure public goods are non-rivalrous. Example, national security. So that even if some more migrants come, it does not really affect the cost of providing national security. But with congestible public goods, if it is you have some Venezuelans coming here, as you see a lot, certainly I see in the Gasparilla area, a lot of pregnant Venezuelan women or Venezuelan women with the children. If it is they use up a significant amount of healthcare and healthcare time, then maybe at some point in time the state would have to increase the healthcare budget in order to cater for the greater increase of some aspects of the healthcare sector by the Venezuelans. So another major difference with the static and dynamic models is how children are considered. This is just mentioned here for completeness. You know, in the long way view, after 18 years or after 20 years, the children of immigrants would be able to make a significant contribution back to the fiscal system which they benefited from for the first X years. We don't have data anywhere near that. So, but we are mentioning it here for completeness. Then there is also the type of immigrants. Christian, I'm just doing a check again to make sure you all are hearing me.
Yes, loud and clear.
If the immigrants are highly educated, Christian, that's good. We could shift the supply capacity of the economy rightwards, and we could shift it rightwards in a way that can increase production of certain type of goods. I mean, most economies try to increase the production of technology-intensive goods. They try to increase the production of export-oriented goods. And so I ask the audience here today, how much of our immigrants are highly skilled? How much of our immigrants, what are the knowledge attributes that we know about our immigrants, Venezuelan immigrants here in Trinidad and Tobago? And what I would say is we know very little. And I would ask why. And I would also answer why. We know very little because we have not registered all the Venezuelans. So it remains a struggle in the corridors of policy making that we are almost guessing. Now the data tracking matrix of the IOM provides some indicative evidence, and that's the best I've seen, and we have to go with that. But I don't understand, and I do not agree with a policy in which we hear the Commissioner of Police, who was a former National Security Minister, use a number like 120,000 illegal Venezuelan immigrants here, if I remember correctly. And then we only have 16,525, I believe, registered. And we are comfortable with that. I am very uncomfortable with that because the registration process is one that could allow us to determine various demographic attributes and socioeconomic attributes of the immigrant to help us with the planning process. Now, it's not to say that unskilled immigrant labor is not useful. In fact, it's very useful, especially in a country in which you have a scarcity of unskilled labor. But there is a danger lurking within this here. And the danger is that, so it's something linked to what I call the Brzezinski theorem from international trade theory. If you have a language barrier and you have unregistered immigrants, then their skills, because of the language barrier and because of their unregistered or undocumented status, makes them only or mainly eligible to work in the non-tradable informal part of the economy. And if
No, you stopped it. No, let's continue with the talk by Dr. Hussein. Yeah.
or so illegal immigrants end up in the informal, non-tradable part of the Trinidad and Tobago economy, that is the worst possible outcome for Trinidad and Tobago. I submit that is the outcome that we need to reverse, and one methodology by which we could reverse that is to register all the migrants, and I am fully aware of the COVID restrictions and how difficult it is, but we register all the migrants and we use the associated data to help us with planning and making more intelligent, information-rich decisions. Now, the literature has quite a few studies that focused on the fiscal impact of immigrants, some from the USA, and you see that the fiscal cost is 0.35% of GDP. So,
for watching and for listening. That was Dr. Roger Hussein, Senior Lecturer at the University of the West Indies in Economics, talking about the Venezuelan migrant situation in Trinidad and Tobago. And before that, we had a very personal account by Rhonda Mango, who heads Living Waters Community, in which she talked from a personal and experiential point of view about what is happening with Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago and what we are doing to help them and what we are doing that makes it very difficult for them. Now, this is a very important conversation because we cannot do like the Venezuelans are not here. They are a reality in Trinidad and Tobago. And we know that there are more than 16,000 people. We have 16,000 registered. And we know that it probably is upwards of 60,000 people in the country because Guyana has 40,000 and they have less than us. And that is the official figures that they have there. And some of the small islands have small amounts, but per capita, we have a significant amount of Venezuelans here, so we need to take them into account. So let us look at what these two people have been saying about the Venezuelan situation, Ms. Mango on the one hand, and Dr. Hussein on the other. The first thing is that, and I give you the opportunity to call in, please, if you want to call and talk about this and talk about your own experience with Venezuelans in your community and so on, you're free to do it. 609-6283, 609-6284. So we welcome callers. Now, Ms. Mengo indicated that one of the problems is education of the children. Now, the one thing you don't want is for immigration or displacement or the fact that people are asylum seekers or refugees. You do not want that to interfere with the education of their children, because that is a loss to the child and a loss to human capital. Dr. Hussein was making the point that if some of these families live here and their children are 6 or 7 years old here now, by the time they're 18, they are going to become productive people in the world. And that is a young human capital asset that you can value. The second thing that Ms. Mengo mentioned was the atmosphere in Trinidad and Tobago, the disposition, whether we were willing to welcome Venezuelans or we had such a hostile attitude and they were under so much pressure that they would take a boat and go back home to Venezuela, although the conditions there are worse than Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, for them to leave Trinidad and Tobago to go back to Venezuela, I think they would have made a horrendous calculation that no matter how bad it is in Venezuela, they're going to be better off there. So I think we need to take those things into account. And what are the economic points that Roger Hussein is making? He is saying, first of all, you have to register all your migrants, because it's no sense saying that your official number is 16,000 when your reality is 60,000 or 70,000, because you cannot then plan with a realistic number. If you're working with the wrong number, you can't get the sums right. So the registration of all migrants, he's saying, is a very important thing. And then he's saying another thing too. We have an aging population problem in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a problem with national insurance. The Minister of Finance talked about that recently, because the aging problem means that less and less people are going to be contributing to NIS, and more people are going to be demanding payment from NIS when they retire. So what he is saying, Dr. Hussein, is that we have an aging population, and the Venezuelan population, the age profile is younger for them. And if that is the case, then what you are creating here is an asset in labor or human capital that we need to capitalize upon in Trinidad and Tobago. The second thing that he is saying is that the labor participation rate in Trinidad and Tobago is horrible. It is 58%. And he's saying that if you get Venezuelans to participate in the labor pool, we can take that up to from 58% now to about 60, 70, 72% as it is in some countries. He mentioned Bahamas. And he said that alone will make a significant contribution to the GDP. Okay? So we can increase the labor participation rate with the Venezuelans. He says once you increase the labor participation rates, they become taxpayers in the economic system once they are registered, and they contribute to value-added tax because they are consumers in the society. So you have an overall positive effect. And he is saying that what we need to be very careful about, given that we have a current account balance situation, that is to say that we are importing more than we are exporting, and we are consuming more of what we import than we can export to make up for that. We also have a foreign exchange problem with the depletion of the foreign exchange because we buy so much imports. And because companies demand so much foreign exchange in order to conduct their business. In that situation, he is saying that because of the current account balance and the foreign exchange challenge, we must make sure that we deploy these Venezuelans in the labor force into areas which contribute to import substitution and areas that contribute to exports. And in the formal sector, not the informal sector, in the tradable goods sector, not in the non-tradable goods sector. So basically he's saying that if we take this human capital and we deploy it rationally, sensibly, with good economic sense, we could make a significant difference to the GDP, to import substitution, and to export earnings of foreign exchange. So that is the argument that he is making for Trinidad and Tobago, taking the Venezuelan community into account. And that is the argument that I want to put on the table so that we can take a more rational approach to this. Now, this is a very challenging situation in Trinidad and Tobago that we've got to manage. Not that they are not costs. If you educate Venezuelan children, that is going to cost the country more. If you have the impact on the health services, that is going to cost the country more. If you have to look after people who cannot help themselves because they are not working, that is going to cost the country more. And all of these things, but in the end, he is arguing the case that it balances out. Now, I've read a little bit about immigration in countries around the world, and I can tell you this. Immigrants, initially when they come, they cost the country money. But ultimately, there is a net benefit to the country. So that is something we need to take into account. The problem for us is the COVID pandemic and the challenge that we are having here and the economic distress that most people are feeling. Are there any callers on the line? No. All right. If you want to call, the number is 609-6283, 609-6284. You can speak on the Venezuelan issue or any other issue. There are many important things taking place around the region and around the world, and I will share some of those with you. I think the biggest challenge for us in our part of the world is this issue of vaccination and whether we're going to keep the country healthy and whether we are going to get the economy going again. And I want to say that it is very difficult to get the economy going if we cannot vaccinate our people, because it means that you create the uncomfortable situation of trying to manage people working who are vaccinated and who are unvaccinated. You heard the situation. Let's take that caller. The caller is on. I'm going to continue afterwards. Let's have the caller. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Dr. Tiwari, and good morning to all your viewers and listeners. Excellent program.
Thank you.
Excellent topic as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just pick up on both your guests this morning, Dr. Mengo and
Dr. Hussein, Ms. Mango and Dr. Hussein, yeah.
Both speaking of very important aspects of the migration situation. And being so close to Venezuela, had we put a system in place way back when, we may have been able to avoid some of the situations that we see happening today. Nevertheless, when the United National Congress was in government, I think you were instrumental in all setting up the growth goals, which would have created industries and which would have created employment opportunities. And I think that is one of the critical aspects that Dr. Roger Hussein has been articulating, the benefits of having the immigrants who are seeking asylum, political and otherwise, be gainfully employed and meaningfully employed into the employment aspect of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, the employment challenge is a real challenge now because of COVID, because so many people have lost their jobs, and we are trying now to get to the vaccination point where we can open up the economy, and that is very important, because if you open up the economy and you have unvaccinated people mixed with vaccinated people, you can have a serious outbreak and maybe mutations, which can be very problematic. But for the Venezuelans, you are correct. If we can get the economy right and begin the process of revival of the economy and then the recovery of the economy, the best place to put the Venezuelans would be, first of all, in agriculture and agricultural production to deal with import substitution. Secondly, in the manufacturing sector so that we could increase exports, and that way we increase the number of shifts of production in the society. And the other thing too is that when immigrants come to your country, they also come with a knowledge about their own society and its needs that is different from the population who live in your society. So they will know, for instance, what could be produced here and exported abroad, either to other parts of Latin America or Venezuela. And even if the situation is bad in Venezuela now, it won't last forever. And therefore, Venezuela becomes a market for intelligent Venezuelan, intelligent in the sense of, I don't mean bright, I mean with the intelligence of knowledge about Venezuela, who can make a difference in export trade to Venezuela. So I just share that with you. You want to add something else?
Yeah, and agriculture being one, it's a vast unexplored area in this country. And had there been close collaboration with the Agricultural Society, DevCo, and there were areas that you would have identified as the growth poles, would have created opportunities in the agricultural sector to make meaningful employment. So that is another aspect of it. I have seen a lot of them being employed in the services sector, and the captains of those industries, the various chambers of commerce, have welcomed them because they come with a different attitude in terms of work and work ethics, which they bring to the fore. So there is tremendous worth in what Dr. Hussein have stated. The virus has put a damper on all those things, and the entire process will now have to be relooked. So that's my contribution. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work. All the best.
And thank you for calling. We appreciate the contribution. Very constructive. 609-6283 is our number. You're welcome to call. 609-6283. Do we have another caller on the line there? Do we have another caller?
Yes, hello, good morning.
Good morning to you, sir.
Okay, I'm employed. I'm employed with CPEP.
Yes.
I'm listening to your program here. It's very constructive. I am employed with CPEP. And the training workers I work along with, these people, as far as I see, there's no too much of productivity in the workplace. And recently, right now, plenty of them is hesitant to go and take the vaccine. And what you all are saying there will turn out to me, from my point of view, to be very good. Get these people going and taking the vaccine. Get them employed.
But
the trainees on them who don't want to work, they don't want to take the vaccine, just substitute. I will see some form of production. Okay?
all right. Well, thank you very much for your contribution. Do you know why they don't want to be vaccinated? Oh, he's gone. Okay, sorry. All right, we'll take the next caller.
Hello, good morning, Dr. Tiwari. So nice to see you on television.
Morning. Thank you for calling.
Dr. Tiwari, do you remember Professor Noel Kalicharan?
Of
I mean,
course.
really, the astounded professor of computer science.
I knew Professor Noel Kalicharan very well.
Wonderful man, wonderful man.
And I was devastated when I heard that he had died, and my condolences to his family, because I had met him almost, what can I say? I'd met him unplanned, fortuitously about a month before. And because we know each other so well, I had sat down with him and we had conversed for about half an hour. And the last thing in my mind was that this man would pass away. I was really, really surprised when he was gone.
Likewise, a lot of us were shocked. But there's something that is interesting. Before the week that Professor Kalicharan passed away, he had an article in a newspaper.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And that was about, he said he liked to deal with statistics because, I mean, he was a mathematician, he was a computer science.
Person,
I mean, he's a brilliant man. And one of the things he said is that he got information, and that article is in the Express newspaper, that in the year 2020, which is last year, in the middle of a pandemic, the coronavirus, there was less deaths in the country in 2020 than 2019. And that was a bit startling. So on average, he was saying 1,000 people usually dies every month. And that was a question that he had put out for the Dr. Hines or something. But I never heard anything back from that. And that was quite interesting, that last year in the middle of a pandemic, there was less deaths in the country than the year before. Now, if that is the case, I asked, why was the country shut down last year? That makes no sense to me. Mm-hmm. And this year, if on average we have 1,000 deaths per month, so if you have, at the end of the year we have 13,000 people, that would be normal for Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah. So that's something that we need to look at. Also, vaccination. Right now there are studies out of Israel that are showing a lot of people who have been vaccinated with the double dose, they are in hospital, about 64%. And they're also saying that the vaccine, although these are experimental vaccine, that you can still get the virus and you can still transmit the virus. So how is that different from an unvaccinated person? I don't, that baffles me. That baffles my logic, right? And this is ought to be a free choice, the vaccines, right? And it has not really been taken through its time because a vaccine takes 10 years to go through its course before it is approved. And none of these vaccines have been approved. They have been approved for emergency use, but not approved.
Yes.
And we are finding there are other methods that can cure people. There are other things that cure people because there are doctors out of South Africa now telling you that the virus has two stages. It has a viral stage and it has an inflammatory stage. And the inflammatory stage, you can treat it just how you treat inflammatory, where the immune system attacks the lungs. You can treat it, and it's treatable. There's a doctor I know that I have researched, and he has saved 4,000 patients with severe coronavirus, outpatient, without the need for oxygen, without the need for ventilators.
Where is this?
In South Africa. In South Africa. Mm-hmm. And so it is treatable. He's treatable, but you have to catch the virus on the 8th day. That is for someone who develops severe coronavirus, not the mild one, because you're finding a lot of people have mild and they get over it. So there's a small percentage. There's something called ACE2 receptors, and what happens is that ACE2 receptors are on the outline of the cells, and they are fixed for healthy people. People have comorbidities. It flows like it's like suspended like a serum. And that's why they were dying, because the virus attacks, it literally latches onto your ACE2 receptors. The hand of the virus is the spike protein that literally opens a door into your cell, which is the ACE2 receptors. And that is where the problem is. So if there's any drug that inhibits the ACE2 receptors, well, that is one way of preventing of the virus. But I would like that, you would look into what Professor Kalicharan has in terms of the numbers, because that's interesting. It's very interesting. If that is the statistics, well, then we need to relook at this whole COVID and coronavirus thing and the lockdown we have in this country. Have a good morning, Dr. Turari. Bye-bye.
All right, okay. Thank you for your contribution. I can't verify the statistics that you pose, so I will not oppose them. I take it that you are giving the statistics in good faith. The second thing that I want to say is that I am not a medical doctor, so I cannot argue the medical case about this. And I don't want to get into that. I'll let the medical practitioners deal with that. What I do want to say, though, is that the death from COVID is a horrible death. It chokes you, it suffocates you, you cannot breathe, and you die alone because nobody is coming near to you in that COVID state when you have the ventilator. And that is something that you have to think about in the calculation of all of these things. And yes, all kinds of arguments have been adduced for not taking the vaccine and taking alternative medicine, etc., taking various kinds of pills. I do not have knowledge of that. I don't have any competence in that area, and I am certainly not going to argue about that. I am not particularly, what can I say, enamored of taking a vaccine for everything. I was very hesitant when they were giving the H1N1 vaccine. And, I thought, why should we do this thing really? But when I look at what is happening around the world and the variants that are emerging, the deadliness of it, the swiftness of its spread, when I see the economic devastation that is taking place, I have to be concerned. And yes, maybe the government did not manage the lockdowns as efficiently and effectively as they could have. But the point is, what's done is done. I think what we have to do is to manage forward now. No sense arguing and griping about the past. I think that is futile. I think what we should focus on is what to do today, tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the few years ahead. And we should focus on the future. And we should focus on the now and getting the solutions once we know what the problems are. But I thank you for your contribution. And anyone who calls here and wants to make a contribution will have free opportunity to express their views as long as they are not, what can I say, as long as they are civil, all right, in the manner in which they make their contribution. We would like to promote democratic discourse and civil discourse on this program, and we want to give this we want to make this forum a place where all can contribute. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Brighter Morning with Bhoe on MCTV and U97.5 Multicultural Hot Like Pepper Radio, and we move on now to Chanel Alsuran for the news.